the importance of this forum, relying as it does on the future for human rights, is because, in my opinion, it is a forum which is providing oxygen to the human rights movement, oxygen which in recent years has started to clearly show signs of atrophy, of sclerosis of sorts. Let me explain. After Vienna, there was a big momentum. 93 Vienna, 94 High Commissioner established. Then came the reform of 97, and human rights was put back on the main agenda of the United Nations. Executive committees were established within the UN system to try to spread human rights around the human rights institutions. The mandate of the High Commissioner by the Assembly designates the High Commissioner as the principal human rights officer of the UN system as a whole. So the years following that were dedicated to making that a reality, so that the United Nations activities around the world had to have a human rights, not just a component, but actually a human rights, shall I say, element within their activities. In other words, human rights should be a kind of common platform for any activities. As a result, in 94, for instance, when the Security Council for the first time in its history admitted human rights as a possible threat to international peace and security after the genocide in Rwanda, and following earlier attempts in regard to the same situation in Yugoslavia, the UN system did reasonably well in that sense of the notion of human rights-based approach to development was elaborated. So human rights, there was a kind of honeymoon, if you like. Then came the Council. The Council was set up in 2006. I think that was very late, as a result of which, once the Council came in, it came in, as we see, in my opinion anyway, on the wrong footing. It came late, so agendas had been formed already, and the distance from Vienna had increased exponentially. The Council was set up as a 47-state member body. Criteria was set up for eligibility, and this was thought to be a good way of ensuring that there would not be the same problems as had been with the Commission on Human Rights before, which has been criticized for politicization and so forth. Experience has shown that since 2006, in reality, the Council kind of became almost monolithic club of just member states. They excluded any meaningful input from civil society. The relevance of the treaty bodies became almost marginal, if not just theoretic. And so there was this kind of polarization within the work of the Council. It was a kind of elitist body, just 47 member states that were supposed to be better than others, as it were. The Universal Periodic Review was devised, an interesting idea where universality for a change was supposed to be respected in the sense that governments spoke to each other. Well, they spoke at each other. They did not speak to each other. They still do, but nevertheless they speak. Now that atrophy has also manifested itself to a larger extent on the field, where although there are human rights offices in most countries in some way or another, they are not actually part of the system in the sense of being a substantive inspiration to the UN work. Most of them are there simply as either monitors, and they are not liked by governments for that reason, or worse still, they are there simply for relatively small training purposes. And this is where the problem is. Human rights as an institution, the Office of the High Commissioner, has not quite managed to be given the place it is conceived to have within the UN system. It is simply yet another UN player alongside the others, along WHO, along ILO, along UNICEF, which is okay, but that's not the role for human rights. Human rights certainly does have a need to have specialized human rights work, but that's minimal. The main work of human rights in the field should be to act as a kind of enabler for the UN system to deliver its work, be it health or labor or children or whatever, within a consistent international human rights context. Now, this lack of oxygen is leading to very serious consequences because the civil society energy, as you know, is huge. In Vienna, we had about 850 NGOs. There were 1,300 correspondents accredited to Vienna alone, but in the preceding regional meetings of Vienna, civil society was huge, and today it's bigger than ever. But the energy generated by civil society is simply not getting through to the Council and its work. Now, the future forum plays a very important critical role in organizing that energy within the civil society community and other agents, and hopefully enabling, catalyzing the international system to find its direction once more. And that is where we are today. In this meeting, today, 65 years of the Universal Declaration, you had ideas coming out with regard to an international parliamentary assembly, with regard to an international bill of human rights in the century in 2018, and 48, sorry. You had the ecocide question, environment as a part of the human rights agenda, and so on and so forth. There's a vitality, but that vitality is outside. Now it's the time to bring it inside the international context, and therefore there is a vision that we need to share. And the vision should be a Human Rights Council made up of the whole, made up of all member states, a Human Rights Council that is supported by two chambers, one civil society, one treaties, and maybe other technical players, and each of those two chambers feeding into the agenda of the Council and ensuring that the Council does address issues that are of concern to civil society and are of concern to the technical experts of the Human Rights Program. In other words, respecting the individuality of all sectors, but enabling their collective complementarity to work to the maximum benefit of the United Nations and therefore of governments in protecting human rights. That's, in my opinion, where we need to go. There's lots to say, of course. The Secretary General, when he proposed the creation of the 47-member Council, said that he also had the option of creating or proposing the creation of a Council of the Whole of all member states. He felt that it was not the right time, but in my opinion, since then, the time has come, because what's happening is negative. The international system, in my opinion, is in human rights context, is losing the plot. It is not addressing human rights as it required by the Charter and indeed by the resolutions of the General Assembly since then. One of the reforms that are needed are the reform of the Human Rights Council, the Human Rights Commissioner. The institution itself, the institution grew exponentially in the early years of the century. Resources were abundant and work was abundant. But as a result, because of this lack of oxygen, there was a loss, an erosion in the vision. What is the vision of the Commissioner? And instead of making sure that the High Commissioner remained really the principal officer, the principal person or institution for the human rights system as a whole, UN system as a whole, it has now become kind of stationed on the side of, as part of the lineup of international bodies. And that needs to be changed.